Do you like happy ending stories where 1,000 girls get their heads cut off? Then you should read 1001 Arabian Nights by Geraldine McCaughrean. And one question before we get to the review: did I enjoy this read? And the answer is yes. Welcome to Whiskey and Literature. I'm your host, Captain Mike, and I'm reading and reviewing 52 books in 52 weeks in 2023. This is my 23rd book review of the year so far, 1001 Arabian Nights by Geraldine McCaughrean. And before we get to the review, let's talk about Geraldine briefly. Geraldine McCaughrean, she is an English children's author, written more than 170 books, including the official sequel to Peter Pan. She has won quite a few awards for her writing, and I can believe it after reading her version of 1001 Arabian Nights. All right, let's talk about my copy of 1001 Arabian Nights. This was first published in 1982. It's 275 pages long. I ordered it off Amazon for $14.95, and I did not listen to it on Audible at all. And if you are a scholar or you're really into this type of book and you're thinking, Captain Mike, you bought the wrong version of the book. Well, you're both right and you're wrong. So I decided to read 52 books in 52 weeks. I just ordered those books without a lot of due diligence into what I was buying. I had a list. I just bought those books as quickly as I could. And so while I do have a kind of a condensed, abridged version of the Arabian Nights, I'm actually really happy that I have this copy. It was very well done, and it's a nice gateway into the full unabridged stories. Okay, let's talk about the style of the book. And this is kind of an interesting one. So I'm going to talk about the history of the actual Arabian Nights tales, and then the specific book that I have. So the actual Arabian Tales, it's a collection of stories from various authors, translators, and scholars from all over Asia and Northern Africa. Some of the tales, they trace their roots back to medieval Arabic, Sanskrit, Mesopotamia, and Persian literature. Most of the tales, however, are older folk stories from older eras, and especially the frame story. It probably comes from the Persian text 1,000 Tales, which itself might be a translation of an older Indian text. So basically what we have here is we have a compilation of old folk stories that has been amended, added to, taken away, translated, and in my version here, condensed and abridged for the consumption of children. The framing device is a great way to tell a collection of stories, and it works to great effect in this book. The main story is the queen telling the king stories night after night in order to save her life. And this book, it is an abridged version of the tales, condensed specifically for children, and I blazed through this reading. Okay, let's talk about the plot of the book. So basically we have the framing story. So we have King Shahryar, and he decides to go visit his brother, who is also a king. So he gets with his retinue and he's riding out of the city, and he remembers that he forgot his gift for his brother. So he returns to the palace to get his gift. Now he really loves his wife, so he left her veiled with instructions to not unveil herself until he returned home. So he goes into his room to get the gift, and there is his wife sitting on the bed, unveiled, next to a stable boy. So he rides to his brother's kingdom, and as he's approaching, his brother comes out, who's also the king, and he's weeping and crying. And King Shahryar says to his brother, "Brother, what's the matter?" And he said, "I found my wife with the cook, and I had to cut her head off." And King Shahryar says to his brother, "Dude, I found my wife and I had to cut her head off too." And so he's really angry and sad and disillusioned. He returns to his kingdom, and for 3 years he stays single because he is convinced that no woman's love can last longer than a day. But after 3 years, he finally decides that he misses some company. Not that he's afraid of the nighttime, but he misses some company and wants to have a wife. And so he calls in his wazir, his wise man, his advisor, and says to the wazir, "Hey, I got an idea. I want to get married." And the wazir is excited. He's like, "Great. The whole kingdom will rejoice. We wish you happiness of, many years with your bride." And he says, "Whoa, whoa. Women are faithless. Their love does not last more than a day. So here's my plan. I want to marry a girl in the morning. I'm going to spend the night with her so she can comfort me through night. And in the morning, we're going to have the headsman come get a room in the palace. And each morning, my wife is going to have her head cut off, and then I'm going to marry a new wife." And the wazir is like, "What? Okay." And so he does this for 1,000 nights. He marries a girl in the morning, has her comfort at night, helps him sleep. In the morning, he has her head cut off and marries another girl. So one day the wazir, he's like, 1,000 girls have had their head cut off. There's almost no girls left in the city. And he realizes that he has 2 beautiful daughters, one who has just come of marriageable age. And he says to his daughters, "You guys got to get out of town. The king, I'm out of girls to find for him. And when the king sees you, my eldest daughter, he's going to want to marry you, and he's going to cut your head off. So I need you guys to leave town." And she says to her father, the wazir, "Dad, if my life will save one woman's life, then it's worth it to me. So I will marry the king." He's really sad, but the king sees his daughter. He falls in love. He marries her. So she's a smart girl, and she says to her sister, her younger sister, "Come to me in the morning. Don't forget, and say these exact words where the king can hear you." So they get married in the morning. They spend the night together. She wakes up the next morning. The king says to her, "Wife, are you ready to go get your head cut off?" And she says, "Yes, husband. To hear is to obey. But first, can I say goodbye to her because I love her so much?" And he says, "Yes, but don't delay because it's time to get your head cut off." So the sister comes in and she says to, now it's Queen Shahrazad. Says to Queen Shahrazad, "Sister, I love you so much. And father and I, we're going to miss you. And we're going to miss your singing and your lovely voice. But most of all, we're going to miss the stories you would tell, the tales you would tell, because they were so entertaining and we loved them so much." And the king hears this and he's like thinking, "Oh, I love to hear nice stories." And so he says to his queen, "Queen, you won't leave this room today. I'm going to come back tonight and you're going to tell me a story." So for the first time in 1,000 nights, his queen doesn't get her head cut off. That night, the king comes in to the queen and she tells him a story. The story of Sinbad the Sailor Man. We've all heard of Sinbad, right? So the story goes on. And I'm not even going to go through any of the stories any of the tales that are in there. I'll mention a couple of them, of the titles, but I'm not going to go through any of them. But she talks about Sinbad long into the night. And the morning comes the next day and it's almost time for the king to go. And he's like, "Oh man, I need to go do some king stuff." And she's like, "Oh, well, I haven't finished the Sinbad story." And he's like, "Okay, well, you stay here. Don't leave. I'll be back tonight. Finish the story. I will spare you today." And she's like, "Okay." So he comes back and you see how it's going, right? So each night she tells a story. She either doesn't finish the story, she drops that there's more to the story, or how that story compares to another story. Just dangling a little hook that the king would bite on to get through one more night. So every day the king would say, "Are you ready to have your head cut off?" Like, "Yes, but do you want to finish the story of Sinbad or Aladdin or Alibaba. And so each night she would get on to the next. It was very well done. And I recognize that these stories are condensed and there is a whole world of stories in these tales that are not in this book. But it was very well done. And the the story Tale of the Anklet, I enjoyed that one as well. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the last chapter of the book. Glasses are coming on. And how the story ends. And there are different endings to this story in different versions. But this is how Geraldine, again, it's abridged for kids reading. I mean, kind of, right? Because there's still 1,000 girls get their heads cut off. And some of the stories are slightly risque, but I understand that like in the unabridged, if you will, non-condensed versions, they're slightly more graphic and erotic maybe. So the king, after 1,000 nights, he gets home at night or goes to his palace in his room, and his sister's not in there. I mean, his wife is not in there. But her sister is waiting nearby. So the king says to Queen Shahrazad's sister, "Go to the queen, your sister, and tell her to come at once to her rightful place in the king's chamber." And I'm going to read just briefly here the last chapter, or part of it. So the sister went to her sister, to the queen, and she comes back and says, the queen sent the message, "I will not come, neither will I tell you another story." The king is shocked, and he says, "Ask your sister and your queen whether she is ill and cannot come tonight." The sister returns, "Tell the king I am not ill, but I will not come, nor will I tell him another story." So the king says, "Say to your sister, my queen, does she not know that I can kill her, as I have killed 1,000 wives before her, if she refuses to obey me?" So the sister runs back to the queen and comes back and says, "My sister, Queen Shahrazad, sends these words. I know full well that the king has power to kill me, but I will not come, nor will I tell him any more stories." And the king was wroth and he cried out really loud. And he said, "Tell her to prepare herself for the headsman," he shouted, and then shut himself away and spent all night, for the first time in 1,000 nights, alone. Actually 2,000 nights, because he spent 1,000 nights cutting heads off, and then he spent 1,000 nights with Queen Shahrazad. So for the first time in 2,000 nights, he spent by himself. And the royal headsman was there, sharpening his sword, and Shahrazad, she's no dummy. She sent her sister to sleep outside the king's bedchamber. And he comes out in the morning and he says, "Ask your sister, my dear wife, if she would be good enough to favor me with the light of her eyes and the sweetness of her voice at whatever time it pleases her to come. But ask her that it should not be too long after the breathing of these words, for I miss her very much." And I tell you what, I was going through this earlier, talking to my wife, Mrs. Captain, about how this ended. I could not get through this chapter without crying. It is very, very well done. We'll see how far I can get here. If I start breaking down, I'm just going to stop and you have to read the book to see what happened. So before the birds had cleared their throats to sing, Shahrazad stood on the threshold of her husband's bedroom. And the king says, "Oh, Shahrazad, why did you defy me? Why did you tempt my temper? Why would you not come? And why would you not tell me any more stories?" "Oh, Shahryar," says Shahrazad, "I have emptied my mouth of all manners and all gentleness, and I have sent words to you saying, I will not come, nor will I tell you another story. For such insolence do I not deserve a sudden death and an unremembered grave." But the king held his head between his hands and let out a groan which shook the leaves of the trees outside the wall of Sasan. Shahrazad shut the chamber. I'm about to cry here. Shahrazad, she was amazing. I mean, we don't hear a lot in her, but her wisdom is great. She shut the door and said to the king, "Oh, my lord, since your soul is in such distress, I see that I must tell you one more story. But let it be known that I will tell no more until the royal headsman has done his worst and returned home." And I'm going to read you the first sentence of this last story. I can't get any further than that. I'm right on the verge of tears right now. The story starts like this. There was once a king who was deceived by an evil woman and lost all his love for ladies. Guys, I cannot read any more of this story, because if I do, I'll start crying on the camera. If you want to know how this story ends, this is Geraldine McCaughrean's interpretation of their framing story, and there are different endings and different versions of 1001 Arabian Nights. Okay, let's get to my thoughts of the book here. And I gave a very quick synopsis of the book. I didn't go through any of the tales. They were all very well done. I enjoyed them thoroughly. Like I said, I blazed through all the tales in this book. So, and I'm just reviewing this specific version of the Arabian Tales. I haven't read any other ones, but this really has whetted my appetite to read more. And I've been looking on Amazon and looking around town, trying to see what would be the best version of 1001 Arabian Tales to read. So if you have read any Arabian Tales, a full book of them, and you have a suggestion for me for a specific translator or a specific copy that I could go find that has as complete and unabridged a work as is available, then let me know, because I am really interested. This is it was a great book to read. I don't actually think there is a definitive version. I mean, it's just a compilation of folk tales. And of course, if you're telling tales and your audience is kids, you are gonna censor it and kind of abridge it a little bit. If you are telling your kids are telling these stories to a bunch of guys sitting in a tent in the Middle East, and you're gonna get very bawdy and erotic with the stories, and I could see that. And so I will say I really enjoyed this book, and I think you should read it. And I think Geraldine McCaughrean did a great job with her version, and you should read it. So that's my review of Arabian Tales by Geraldine McCaughrean, and here let's go to the star rating. And I judge all books on 5 criteria, and if you have any suggestions for my reviews, drop them in the comments section below. Initial response: how did I feel when I first finished this book? And I gave it a 4. I did really enjoy it. Maybe, we'll give it a 4. It was very nice. Recommendation: how likely am I to recommend this book? I'll give it a 4 as well. I thought it was pretty well done. A wide variety of audience could read this book. Style: did I enjoy the writing style? I actually only gave it a 3. Again, I thought Geraldine did a really nice job. I would like more meat to the stories. They were so quick. You could tell they were condensed and abridged and said for an audience that's not a 50-year-old guy. So I only got a 3 just because I would actually like to read the unabridged tales. For plot and structure, I give it a 5. How engaged was I in the story? I was very engaged, so I was like turning page after page. So I did actually enjoy what was going on, and most of the tales were really well done. And character, I only gave it a 3 for the characters. I really like Shahrazad, but some of the characters within the tales, they were just okay. I mean, I don't think they were like necessarily believable, relatable. No, I mean, they were engaging, so it got a 3. But that's 19, and 19 divided by 5 is 3.8. So 3.8 stars for 1001 Arabian Nights by Geraldine McCaughrean. And I think that's a nice, appropriate score for this book. All right, guys, thanks for sticking with me. If you enjoyed the video, like it. It's free. Subscribe to see more of my content. I do both book and whiskey reviews, which isn't confusing for anybody. None of my viewers are YouTube, of course. I mean, it even confuses me sometimes. But if you'd like to see more of my content, feel free to subscribe and see what I've got. But for now, I hope you are reading something good and drinking something great. Turn the pages, my friends, and stay thirsty. Cheers.